I got to tell you something you already know today, and that is words carry power with them. Words carry more than just what the word means technically. Think about it when you talk about words, and we know this because one of the things that I always try to impress with people when we're talking about how you raise your children and how you treat your children, the importance of never saying things to them like, "You're bad," "You're awful." It's great to describe what they're doing as bad or wrong, but never giving them that word that somehow they take inside them. We do it with words that deride other people, and we know that. We use slang and we use terrible phrases to kind of put people down and put them in their place. But on the other side of that, words can be uplifting. They can really give us life and meaning and power, and so it's one of those great things that we can do is look at words that are important and significant deeply and well beyond the word itself. And today we have one of those words. We're going to be talking about the Sabbath and Sabbathing, which is a new word probably for many of you. It's still a new word in my computer when I try to turn it on and use the spell check. So it's a word that carries meaning and depth with it. And so I want to start just talking about the Sabbath for a little bit and the original meaning and what it's come to mean through the years. But the Sabbath is given to us in the Ten Commandments, and we know that. As God says, it's important for us to work and to labor 6 days of the week, but on that seventh day to rest. To rest and to honor God. And that's one of the original meanings of the Sabbath. But there's another original meaning of the Sabbath that the rabbis talk about. They talk about the importance of it. And it's sitting back and seeing the Sabbath as a vision of what might come as the Messiah comes. A vision of what the future might bring, and you put everything in perspective. You step back from all that's going on in the week and begin just to look over your life and to put everything in perspective and in its proper place. We begin to see things through the eyes of love. That is one of the great gifts of the Sabbath, to begin to see things not through our normal weekday eyes, but the eyes of love. Justin Martyr, who is an early Christian writer, said this: one of the purposes of the Sabbath is to honor our new creation. Because we are new creatures in Christ, aren't we? And so on the Sabbath, we're called to honor that and do enriching things. Some of you may have wondered why we chose that song to use today to set up the message. Well, it's a perfect song about the life-giving elements of the Sabbath. My favorite things. What a wonderful thought about new creation, about life-giving activities on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not simply about, setting the time aside for a good nap. It's not about going and resting. It's not just about coming to church. The Sabbath for us is also about doing things that create new life, new energy, that renew us. And so, man, I don't know about you, but when I think of my favorite things, they often give me renewal in life, don't they? I mean, that's what we do. I mean, there's nothing better for my spiritual journey than a motorcycle ride. I can't wait. I know spring's coming in June or July, sometime down the road. And I'm looking forward to getting back on the Harley and taking off through the roads and the byways and living again. And it's an important time to do that and to renew my energy and my life. We should see the Sabbath not only as a day of rest, but an opportunity to celebrate life. And sometimes what happens is when we start off with something that God gives us, we think we have to fine-tune it. Have you ever noticed that? That maybe God meant more than what God said in the Scripture, and so we're going to fine-tune it. And that's what the legalists have done. We'll go first in looking at what they did, and the rabbis and the teachers of the law did, because once they started, they decided there were at least 39 things that we couldn't do on the Sabbath. And that was the original list, 39, and I'm going to give it to you. So you got your listening ears on, because, in fact, I wish Allison was here, because I'd have Allison read it, because she can read much faster than me. But I'm going to do my best. Here's the things that you couldn't do on the Sabbath. You couldn't sow, you couldn't plow, you couldn't reap, you couldn't bind, you couldn't sheave, you couldn't thresh, you couldn't winnow, you couldn't select, you couldn't grind, you couldn't sift, you couldn't knead, you couldn't bake, you couldn't shear wool, you couldn't wash wool, you couldn't beat wool, you couldn't dye wool, you couldn't spinning, you couldn't do spinning, weaving, you couldn't make two loops, you couldn't weave two threads, you couldn't separate two threads, you couldn't do tying, you couldn't do untying, you couldn't do sewing stitches, you couldn't do tearing, trapping, slaughtering, flaying, tanning, scraping hide, marking hard, cutting to shape, writing two or more letters, or erasing two or more letters, building, demolishing, extinguishing a fire, building a fire, putting the finishing touch on a project, or transporting an object in the public domain more than 4 cubits. That's just the starters of how we began to say, oh, how can we legalize the Sabbath and make it a ritual instead of a life-giving moment? I know on my first trip to Israel, and of course, the Jews call the Sabbath the Shabbat, and I may intermingle that word today in the message, but on the Shabbat, in the hotels you stay in, they have a Shabbat elevator, because now we've interpreted doing work as pushing the button of the elevator. So Jews can't push the button of the elevator, so the Shabbat elevator stops on every floor, so they don't have to push the button and work. And I said, it's amazing when you see, I know doctors in a Jewish hospital in Skokie when I was in seminary, they could work because they were giving life, but they couldn't use the elevator unless somebody else pushed the buttons. They had to go up the stairs. I guess walking up the stairs is not work, pushing a button is work. Is that crazy? Good thing we Christians never did anything like that, isn't it? And I know, and as you may well know too, I grew up in Indiana with blue laws that prohibited so many things from happening on the Sabbath, because instead of about making it life-giving, we decided if we could prohibit us from doing certain things that would be better for us. And so there were things, as you well know, there were grocery stores that weren't open, gas stations weren't open, there wasn't much open. I can remember that as a child. One of the things that has always amazed me that's been a holdover from that, and some people didn't know it, I talked to somebody this week, you can still, in Indiana, not buy a car or a motorcycle on a Sunday. I go into the Harley dealer on a Sunday here, and they have to take the price tags off the motorcycles. They can't even let you know what they're valued at. You have to wait till Monday to find that out. So we have those things too that we thought would have probably been good, but somehow we kind of twisted them into these laws that weren't giving life. They weren't giving us a time to be closer to God. They were just giving us restrictions. And that's why today's passage from Matthew is so important to us, because it's a reminder from Jesus that the Sabbath wasn't made for man, but man was made for the Sabbath. It's that idea that not only do we rest and honor God, but it's the idea that we create new energies, new life. We do things that are going to bring life to our families and to ourselves. And that Jesus said, hey, we needed to eat on the Sabbath. We're going to eat on the Sabbath. We need to get grain out of the fields. We're going to get them because those are life-giving activities. And that's what we're called to do on the Sabbath. So we are called to put down our weekday tools, whether they be a pen, a computer, a hammer, a saw, a piece of farm equipment, whatever they are, we're to set those aside and not run ourselves ragged. There's no doubt about that. But we're also to begin to look at other things. One of my phrases that I've always liked over the years is the Sabbath is to remind us that we're human beings, not humans doing. You see, it's not about doing anymore, it's about being in the presence of God on the Sabbath. Respite from the world and a renewal of life. Sabbath is a very active word that we've tried to make passive. We've tried to make it all about doing nothing, about resting, about making it about things we cannot do. But by just edging that word a little bit and move it from the noun to the verb and say the real purpose of the Sabbath is Sabbathing. Now, that's a crazy word. What might that word mean for us? Sabbathing brings new meaning with us. It brings new meaning to the day. It's still about resting from our labors, there's no doubt. But now it becomes an opportunity to say, as I do Sabbathing, it's going to be a life-giving opportunity, a positive life forth. Sabbathing reminds us of Sunday and encourages us also into the concept of rest, renewal, and life. Rest, renewal, and life. It's not just about the rest, by its very nature, Sabbathing is something we can do not just on Sunday, but we can take it with us in the other days of the week. If I had to only Sabbath on Sunday, I'd be in trouble. I mean, I only work 2 hours a week, but they're on Sunday. You know, that's really a bummer. And so I said, I have to say, when in the week can I find time in my life to Sabbath, to practice Sabbathing in my life? And it's an important activity. Sometimes I wish we had, the Jewish way of doing the Sabbath. All of you know what the Jews do on the Sabbath. It begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday. I like that pattern because they go to worship, they go to temple on Friday night, and that's what they do. And then they go to sleep. They get their rest in. And then Saturday until sundown comes again. It's an opportunity for life-giving activities, for bringing energy to their life and love and care. And so they can do those things, and maybe that's a better pattern. We seem to begin the Sabbath on Sunday at midnight, and we sleep the first 7 hours of it. And then we decide we still can take a nap if we're lucky in the afternoon. And so we think it's more on rest and less on doing those life-giving things. Rabbi Andrea Frank says that our children need the Sabbath too. I don't know if you've thought about that or not, but they need a Sabbath from their daily grind, whether it's school, whether it's whatever they do during the week. Sabbathing is an opportunity to set aside the busyness of life. She takes a radical approach, which I know most parents here would be scared to death of, but she suggests that no texting or no television or no computers, or no soccer, or no all of those things that I know I might get stuff thrown at me if I'm not careful. Because that's what Sundays become sometimes, hasn't it? A list of we go from doing one thing to another thing. And she suggests that, that maybe we should spend more time giving our children attention, giving them life energy, playing with them, enjoying them, loving them. You see, Sabbathing gives us an opportunity to focus on our children and others that we care about and love. It gives us an opportunity to encourage them, to show them that they are valued, not for what they do, but simply because of who they are. And she says in her little message that the sad thing is most of us would prefer rather to go back to Egypt and do things that way because it's easier and safer than living a Sabbathing style of life. We're enslaved to things that we do on the Sabbath. You see, the Sabbath really is not about legalistic restrictions, but it offers a gateway to peace and strengthening our relationship with God and the relationship with the family. The Sabbath, above all things, should be about celebrating joy. The 150th Psalm is the last Psalm. And in that psalm it says we should dance and we should sing and we should show our joy, but so often we fail to do that, and the Sabbath is a good time to reflect on that. There's a story about two rabbis who decided on a certain Sabbath they were going to go away with their families and to retreat at the mountain, and so they got there and they were retreating and they were doing their thing, and they had a great night of worship, and then the next day, as they were eating, they began to sing the Sabbath songs. And it kind of filled the area around them on the mountainside with joy. And so as they were leaving that day to take a walk, the two rabbis were walking, and they came across a man who was a Buddhist who was meditating under a tree. And the Buddhist said to them, I heard the music, and it was like I was brought into the presence of God. It brought me life. He said, it was an amazing thing. And then I said, I haven't thought it was heavenly for a while. And then I realized that it was much more human than that. And then he told them this story about how he had been raised Jewish and he'd sought for spirituality. He'd sought to meet God, and he kept searching because he couldn't find it in the synagogue. And so he went on this journey and eventually became a Buddhist monk because he thought that might be where God was leading him. And in that moment, one of the rabbis looked at him and said, I want to say something to you that's so important. I want to say to you that the music you heard was heavenly music. It was music that creates life and joy. You heard the music, you heard the joy because God gave it to you. God gave it to you on the Sabbath to lead you home. I've always thought that Christians, when we want to bring people either back to the church or to the church for the first time, we are some of the saddest looking creatures on earth. Have you ever wondered if we shared joy that we got from our experience with God, that it might attract more people than showing a sad or dour face or beating them over the head with our Bibles? Maybe we can show them the love of God, the joy of God. And that's what we're called to do. I want to leave you today with an action plan. I want you to begin to say, I'm going to make Sabbathing an important part of my life. I'm going to begin to honor the Sabbath, honor God, honor rest, but also figure out how to create new life through Sabbathing. So number one thing I want you to do is I want all of us to decide what you need to stop doing each Sabbath in order to have freedom from the material world. What can you stop doing? And there's a lot of things. It's kind of up to you. You can decide, I'm not going to travel anymore on Sundays, or I'm not going to watch television. I know that's a tough one in this day and age. Or I'm not going to get on my computer, or whatever it might be. But what can you give up that's pulling you back to what you do every other day of the week? What can you give up on this day to say, I'm honoring the rest of God, and I want to rest in God on this day? So what can you give up? 2, what new activities might you add that would awaken a Sabbath joy in you? The joy that the monk heard, the joy of music, the joy of whatever it might be. You can do some spiritual things at home if you'd like. Maybe you want to light candles. You could do some traditional things. You could nap. And by the way, these are all suggestions from rabbis, because I wanted to have a disclaimer before I get to one of them. So I want you to know that. Because they say you should do things like play games, eat, sing, dance, make love, bless other people. So don't blame me, blame the rabbis for that one, okay? All those are creative, life-giving activities. Can you add something like that to your Sabbath? Can you add one of those to your Sabbath? Blessing others, blessing your children, blessing your family, blessing friends. And I'm going to end today talking about that very thing in just a few moments. But what can you do? You can give to charity. You can have special conversations. Make a phone call to a friend you haven't talked to in 10 years. Do something to give life on this day. The third thing is use these blessings and prayers as a way to open up your heart. So use the prayers of the day to open up your heart to God. Do them in the service. Do them at home. Do them for others. Wherever you can, use prayers on the Sabbath to enrich that moment. And number 4 is this. See how much of the Sabbath feeling you can take into the week with you. That may be the biggest challenge of all. When this day ends and your work week starts, whether it's with McDonald's coffee on Monday morning with the gang, or whether it be at your job, or whether it be at school, how can you move to take with you this Sabbath recreation, this spirit that you begin to feel on the Sabbath? This is the move from Sabbath to Sabbathing, because you're going to do it each and every day. So I want you to remember this. Sabbathing is not about what we do. It's about having life-giving and life-creating activities. Last night, I had a very close friend who was having a tragic situation in their family. This is a person that's had a tough life when it comes to loss. Lost a brother to suicide, lost their mother at a young age. They had a stepmother that got very, very ill, and they had to go in and do a surgery that perhaps only a miracle could fix. And so last night I began praying, and I began sharing that through electronic communication as we were sharing with others as a group. And I kept sharing every time I would pray, and I would pray, and I would pray. And so I tried to go to sleep last night, and sleep was not to be found last night. I guess I didn't start off the Sabbath resting well. But I started off the Sabbath with prayer to bless other people. Finally, about 3 o'clock this morning, I got an electronic private message from somebody else, a Navajo member of my last church, who said to me, "Go to sleep." And I said, "Oh, I should." At about 4:30 this morning, after being in more prayer, I received a message that the person we were praying for had passed away. The surgery was not successful, and they passed away. So were those prayers ineffective? We talked about prayer last week, didn't we? Prayer is strengthening my relationship with God. And as I did mine, I knew that they were feeling the prayers that I was giving as God's relationship with them continued on. And so prayer, as I said, is an important part of Sabbathing as I bless other people even in the midst of their pain. So I know that in that moment, as I talked to them for the final time this morning and they tried to go home and were figuring out how to tell their own children that their grandmother was gone, how to do all of those things, I knew that God was with them. I knew that the prayers that I had offered at the beginning of the Sabbath were effective and they're powerful and they're life-giving because it allowed them to know that even in the midst of this tragedy, God was there. You see, God didn't change the circumstance, but God was there. God was holding the hand of her stepmother. God was holding all of the family in the palm of God's hand, giving them new life and rest because that's what the Sabbath is all about. And so Jeannie has new life this day. Not life with us anymore, but new life. And it came on the Sabbath. And we have new life today too. The only difference is we are still here. So are we going to honor the Sabbath? And are we going to rest in God and do creative, life-giving things in our families and in our community? I hope it is so for all of us. Thanks be to God. Amen.